Good evening and welcome back to another episode of The Longing. Today we are going to be continuing to read The Golden Age, and I also want to say I hope everyone had a good New Year's and Happy New Year's to everyone. So, let's get reading. The doctor appeared puzzled. I briefly explained the situation. "I see," said the doctor, looking grave and twisting his face this way and that. "Well, the fact is there isn't going to be any battle today. It's been put off on account of the change in the weather. You will have due notice of the renewal of hostilities. And now you'd better jump in and I'll drive you home. You've been running a fine rig. Why, you might have both been taken and shot as spies." This special danger had never even occurred to us. The thrill of it accentuated the cosy, home-like feeling of the cushions we nestled into as we rolled homewards. The doctor beguiled the journey with blood-curdling narratives of personal adventure in the tented field, he having followed the profession of arms, so it seemed, in every quarter of the globe. Time, the destroyer of all things beautiful, subsequently revealed the baselessness of these legends. But what of that? There are higher things than truth, and we were almost reconciled, by the time we were dropped at our gate, to the fact that the battle had been postponed. Excuse me. The finding of the princess. It was the day I was promoted to a toothbrush. The girls, irrespective of age, had been thus distinguished some time before. Why, we boys could never rightly understand, except that it was part and parcel of a system of studied favouritism on behalf of creatures both physically inferior and, as was shown by a fondness for tale-bearing, of weaker mental fibre. It was not that we yearned after these strange instruments in themselves. Edward indeed applied his to the scrubbing out of his squirrel's cage, and for personal use, when a superior eye was grim on him. Borrowed Harold's or mine indifferently. But the nimbus of distinction that clung to them, that we coveted exceedingly. What more, indeed, was there to ascend to, before the remote, but still possible, razor and strop? Perhaps the exaltation had mounted to my head, or nature and the perfect morning joined to him at disaffection. Anyhow, having breakfasted and triumphantly repeated the collect I had broken down in the last Sunday, 'twas one about rhythm or alliteration, a most objectionable collect. Having achieved thus much, the small natural man in me rebelled, and I vowed as I straddled and spat about the table-yard, in feeble imitation of the coachman, that lessons might go to the inventor of them. It was only geography that morning, anyway, and the practical thing was worth any quantity of bookish theoretic. As for me, I was going on my travels, and imports and exports, populations and capitals might very well wait while I explored the breathing, coloured world outside. True, a fellow rebel was wanted, and Harold might, as a rule, have been counted on with certainty. But just then Harold was very proud. The week before he had gone into tables, and had been endowed with a new slate, having a miniature sponge attached, wherewith we washed the faces of Charlotte's dolls, thereby producing an unhealthy pallor which struck terror into the child's heart. Always timorous regarding epidemic visitations. As to tables, nobody knew exactly what they were, least of all Harold, but it was a step over the heads of the rest, and therefore a subject for self-adulation and, generally speaking, airs, so that Harold, hugging his slate and his chains, was out of the question now. In such a matter, girls were worse than useless, as wanting the necessary tenacity of will and contempt for self-constituted authority. So eventually I slipped through the hedge, a solitary Protestant, and issued forth on the lane what time the rest of the civilized world was sitting down to lessons. The scene was familiar enough, and yet this morning how different it all seemed. The act with its daring tinted everything with new, strange hues, affecting the individual with a sort of bruised feeling just below the pit of the stomach that was intensified whenever his thoughts flew back to the ink-stained, smelly schoolroom. And could this be really me, or was I only contemplating, from the schoolroom aforesaid, some other jolly young mutineer, faring forth under the genial sun? Anyhow, here was the friendly well, in its old place, half-way up the lane. Hither the yoke-shouldering village folk were wont to come to fill their clinking buckets. When the drippings made worms of wet in the thick dust of the road, they had flat wooden crosses inside each pail, which floated on the top, and we were instructed, served to prevent the water from slopping over. We used to wonder by what magic this strange principle worked, and who first invented the crosses, and whether he got a peerage for it. But indeed the well was a centre of mystery, for a hornet's nest was somewhere hard by, and the very thought was fearsome. Wasps we knew well and disdained, storming them in their fastnesses. But these great beasts, vestured in angry orange, 3 stings from which, so 'twas averred, would kill a horse, these were a different kidney, and their warning drone suggested prudence and retreat. At this time neither villagers nor hornets encroached on the stillness. Lessons apparently pervaded all nature. So, after dabbling a while in the well, what boy has ever passed a bit of water without messing in it? I scrambled through the hedge, avoiding the hornet-haunted side, and struck into the silence of the copse. If the lane had been deserted, this was loneliness become personal. Here mystery lurked and peeped. Here brambles caught and held with a purpose of their own, and saplings whipped the face with human spite. The copse, too, proved vaster in extent, more direfully drawn out than one would ever have guessed from its frontage on the lane, and I was really glad when at last the wood opened and sloped down to a streamlet, brawling forth into the sunlight. By this cheery companion I wandered along, conscious of little but that nature, in providing store of water-rats, had thoughtfully furnished provender of right-sized stones. Rapids also there were, telling of canoes and portages, crinkling bays and inlets, caves for pirates and hidden treasures. The wise dame had forgotten nothing, till at last, after what lapse of time I know not, my further course, though not the streams, was barred by some 6 feet of stout wire netting, stretched from side to side, just where a thick hedge, arching till it touched, forbade all further view. The excitement of the thing was becoming thrilling. A black flag must surely be fluttering close by. Here was evidently a malignant contrivance of the pirates, designed to baffle our gunboats when we dashed upstream, to shell them from their lair. A gunboat indeed might well have hesitated. So stout was the netting, so close the hedge. But I spied where a rabbit was wont to pass, close down by the water's edge. Where a rabbit could go, a boy could follow, albeit stomach-wise and with one leg in the stream. So the passage was achieved, and I stood inside, safe, but breathless at the sight. And with that we come to the end of the episode, and I will say this book in particular is taking a much longer time to read for some reason. I don't know what it is about it, but it does seem to take much longer to do a page compared to other books. So I think this one is going to be a particularly long reading, just for difficulty's sake. But anyway, I will say thank you very much for joining me today. Happy New Year, and I wish everyone a wonderful morning, evening, afternoon, or night, no matter what time of day it is. I hope you all have a wonderful one of it, and as always, we will be back tomorrow for more of The Longing. Goodbye.